Everything I'm going to tell you is true also for humans, and we know this now from human studies. One of the most important things to take away from this study was that mice that ate a highly palatable, high-fat diet, a great-tasting diet, but only during a restricted feeding window of each 24-hour cycle, maintained or lost weight over time. Whereas mice that ingested the same diet, same amount of calories, but had access to those calories around the clock, gained weight, became obese, and quite sick. And as an additional second point, the mice that restricted their feeding window to a particular portion of 8 hours of every 24-hour cycle actually showed some improvement in important health markers. And what was even more incredible is that mice that only ate during a particular feeding window also experienced some reversal of some prior negative health effects. So this study really lit up the world and got people excited about time-restricted eating. Again, they used an 8-hour feeding window. The story around that 8-hour feeding window is kind of interesting, though. Not many people know this because it wasn't included in the paper, and there was no reason to include it in the paper. Not to out anybody, but it turns out that the reason they used an 8-hour feeding window and not a 9-hour or a 10-hour feeding window is because studies of this sort are actually quite demanding to perform and require the constant presence of the graduate student or postdoc there to ensure that the food is in the cages at particular times and not in the cages at other times. And mice are really good at hiding food. They'll even hide food in their jowls. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done to prepare for that 8-hour feeding window and to make sure after that 8-hour feeding window, there's all the food has been removed from the cage and from the jowls of the mice and so forth. And it turns out that the significant other of the graduate student and or postdoc, I won't reveal who they were, running this study, forbid their significant other, the scientist, from being in the lab for periods of time that were much longer than the 10 or 12 hours that were required in order to ensure this 8-hour feeding window. So when we hear that 8-hour feeding windows are holy, they are not holy.